Thank you, Lynn. I'm excited to be here. And we've got a lot of ground to cover. And so I wanted to start with this. Scott McKnight hates slides. And I've known Scott for a long time. He actually wrote the foreword for my book, Unarmed Empire. But you need to know, I hate slides too, but this is not about me. And so our time together to help you track and help me keep up, I'm going to use some slides. There's a great story that happened in the Middle East 1 billion years ago. And there was a famine throughout the land. And the famine not only killed people through the famine, but the drought and wars killed more people. And in that land, there was a young man named Taharvallah. And Taharvallah decided that he did not want to die from the famine. So he laid down one day and gave his life up to the gods. And he died. When Taharvallah awoke, he found himself in the land of the dead. And he met the Khan of the dead. And the Khan of the dead tells him, "You're not supposed to be here. You're not dead yet. You have to go back to the land of the living. But before you go back, I will show you around the land of the dead. And you can take anything from the land of the dead with you that you want." And in the land of the dead, they have just about everything. And Taharvallah looks at everything. And he decides that what he wants to take back to the land of the living are stories. And so he wakes up back in the land of the living. But he was dead. And the crows decided that he was dead. And the time that he's been dead, the crows have plucked his eyes out, and he cannot see. But by the time Taharvallah actually dies, after living hundreds of years, he is the most well-known man in the world because he spent his life telling stories. And what we learn is stories are a way of seeing. And as the African proverb puts it, seeing is different from being told. Jesus comes and teaches parables. And some of them are straightforward, and some of them are confusing. Some of them are straightforward, but the disciples want to believe they are confusing, so they keep asking questions about them, because it can't be what you actually said. It has to be something different. But they are a way of seeing. And then Jesus is ascended to heaven, and what does the church do? The church decides to take those stories and turn them into points. And Paul writes points, and the early church writes points. And most of the sermons that most of us heard this last week were points. And I was in this Facebook group several years ago, and it's all preachers in that group. And one of them, on a Thursday afternoon, preparing for Sunday, wrote a comment about what he was teaching this upcoming Sunday. And he says, "Can anybody give me some points?" And my soul died. Because what we're afraid of as preachers is that people won't get the point. And so instead of trusting the story, we make sure we give them the point, because that will make us feel better. And you've got that person in your church, maybe lots of those people in your church, who say, "I want something I can write down and stick in my pocket and take home," which they never do. Because we all got those people whose Bible lives on the backseat of their car with all of their sermon notes in it. And this is what Fred Craddock talked about, the differences between recall and recognition. The temptation for the preacher is to preach something that people can recall. Notes, points. But stories work in recognition. 60 years ago, there was a show called The Twilight Zone. They had an episode where this all-powerful little boy terrorized his family and the entire town. No one came in, industry shut down. Everyone was afraid of saying anything or doing anything to this little boy because of his retribution should they do it. And it is, according to scholars, the most terrifying episode of The Twilight Zone. 3 weeks ago, I wrote about this episode of The Twilight Zone, not because I remember it so well, but it just came to mind. I recognized a pattern where a group of people were terrified by someone who was petty and childish and in power. And I just mentioned the episode and what happened. And guess what? Everybody knew what I was talking about. Because stories root down and they go deep. And they come up, not in your recall, but in your recognition. I recognize what this is. I see what this is. And so we're going to talk about stories and how they work. Every story that is a great story works the same way. You will push back on me saying this, and you will be wrong. But every story works the same way. There are some twists and turns and a little bit more here or a little bit more there, but fundamentally they work the same way. And the parables, by and large, work the same way. And once you begin to see it, you can't unsee it. All great stories begin with once upon a time. This is the state of the case in this place at this time. And every day in that state and in that place is the same. Until one day, something happens. And because of this happening, and then because of this, and that is different from scenes of things happening. Because this happened, this next thing happens. Until finally, something changes. And ever since that day, once upon a time, there was a man who had 2 sons. Until one day, he asked. And because of this, he went off. And because of this, he wasted his money in wild living. Until finally, he decides to come home. And ever since that day, every story works that way. And when you get it out of order or you get it mixed, you've got to recover it somehow. And when someone gets all of this wrong, that's when you say, this book that I just read, this movie I saw, this television show, this limited series that I just watched, that's when you say, it made no sense. So I want you to imagine the sermon in 3 acts. And what you need to know about this is 3 acts is better than 3 points. Years ago, I did a series of teachings for this organization, Strategic Government Resources, and they train chiefs of police, chiefs of the fire departments, mayors across the United States. And they said, because I was there, that I could use some of my Christian stuff, knowing that I was a pastor, and most of them were actually Christians, especially the ones here in Texas. And they were facing some dilemmas right after George Floyd, and I would talk to them about what was happening in each of their cities, and I would say to them, you know that the Bible has a story about this, right? And they did. But because they had been trained on points that their preacher had made, they knew how to apply that point to the one particular situation that the preacher used when they made the point in the first place, but they didn't know how to create it in the story. They didn't know how to recognize. They knew how to recall. So Aristotle said every story has a beginning, middle, and end. I listen to a lot of sermons as a preaching coach, and let me tell you, most of the sermons I listen to are just middle. Both middle in degree of goodness and just the middle of the sermon. It is an exposition dump because many preachers feel that the greatest sin they could commit is to have their church think they didn't do their homework, and they want to think themselves smarter than the church that they're in. And so they just give a bunch of exposition. And some church member will come up to them and say, "Oh, you just give us so much text." They have no clue what to do with that text, but they got it. But every book on Amazon has a lot of text. That's not special. Act 1, which is generally the first 7 minutes of your sermon. And I'm going to tell you how to teach in 3 acts by using the greatest movie ever made, Die Hard. And not only is Die Hard the greatest movie ever made, it is the greatest Christmas movie ever made. If you don't believe me, I will meet you in the parking lot and we can fight. Die Hard begins plane landing at LAX. We look inside the plane, we meet John McClane. He's sitting next to another passenger. They begin talking. Passenger next to him says, "You don't like flying much, do you?" "No, I don't." Here's the key. When you get to where you're going, take your shoes off, make balls of your feet on the rug. Works every time. They're departing, deplaning the plane. John McClane reaches up to grab this bear, the largest bear. Like there's no TSA from wherever he's flying from, because that bear will not fit in any overhead that I know of. He sees a sidearm, and John McClane comforts his seatmate with the reality that he's a cop. Go inside the terminal. McClane is by the baggage claim. He sees a young woman in yoga pants run up, jump into the arms of her significant other. He looks back and he says, "LA. Couple things we know. We know that he doesn't like to fly. He's got instructions what to do. He doesn't like LA. He meets Argyle, his limo driver. Argyle says, I've never done this before. McClane, I've never done this before. As they're driving to meet his wife at her workplace, they have a conversation about why John did not come to LA with his wife. And we find out that John just thought this was all going to peter out and that she would come running back. So now we know that there is difficulty in their relationship. Pulls into Nakatomi Plaza, goes inside, meets a security guard. Security guard says, "Everybody's in this little computer. Just look for her name in there." He does. He looks up Holly McClane. It's not there. Exhales. Holly Gennaro. She's going by her maiden name. And then he says, "Oh, they're all on the 34th floor. They're the only ones in the building." Well, you could have told me that when I first came in here. Why did I have to look through this whole machine? One reason, so that I know that she's going by her maiden name. Goes upstairs. They reconnect. They go into a coworker's office. He takes off his shoes. He's making balls of feet. They get into an argument. Smash cut. We see a truck coming into Nakatomi Plaza. In front of the truck is a Mercedes-Benz. 2 guys get out of the Mercedes. They kill the security guard. They open up the gate for the truck. The truck comes in. They shut the gates. The back of the truck goes up. You see Hans Gruber, the greatest villain in movie history, get out of the back of the truck with all of his henchmen. They begin immediately going to their assignments. Holly and John are arguing upstairs. They get in the elevator, Hans and his men. They go up to the 34th floor. The elevator doors open. He steps out. You hear gunfire. John looks out the window, looks out the door, sees what's going on, turns around, shirtless and shoeless, grabs his gun, runs across the hallway to the stairs. End of Act 1. Everything you need to know for the rest of that movie just happened. Everything to make, why is he barefoot? What's their relationship? There's a guy named Jeb Stewart who was a screenwriter for Die Hard. And he didn't want to do the project, but he really needed the money. He got in a fight with his wife the day that they offered him to do the job. He goes for a long drive on the 101 freeway in California. A refrigerator box falls off the back of the truck in front of him. He veers, slides off the road into a ravine. nearly dies. Laying in the ravine, he says, that's what the movie's about. A man has a fight with his wife, and it cannot end that way. And this is why Die Hard is the greatest movie ever made. And if you didn't believe that, there are over 35 films that people call the children of Die Hard because they're trying to tell that story again. This is how parables work. It's the story beneath the story that roots down, and there's a reason that that movie is so popular because it's not about gunfights, whether people know it or not. It's about a man who has a fight with his wife and decides it can't end that way. And so right as the third act begins, he's taking glass out of his feet, and he's on the phone, he's on the walkie-talkie with a police officer downstairs, and he says to him, he's like, if I don't make it out of this, find my wife, you'll figure out how, and tell her this. She's heard me say I love you 1,000 times. She's never heard me say I'm sorry. That's the movie. That's the story you're telling. The story beneath the story. That people might come back around to you like the disciples come to Jesus and say, now what was that about? Act 1 tells a story. They hear everything that they need to know. You've got 7 minutes in a sermon to do this. To introduce the characters and introduce the tension. And here's what I want you to know. Let's have a joke together. This is the joke. A seaman meets a pirate in a bar. The two men take turns boasting of their adventures on the high seas. The seaman notes the pirate has a peg leg, hook, and an eye patch. He asks, so how did you end up with a peg leg? The pirate replies, we were in a storm at sea and I was swept overboard into a school of sharks. Just as my men were pulling me out, a shark bit my leg off. Wow, said the seaman, what about your hook? Well, replied the pirate, while my men and I were plundering in the Middle East, I was caught stealing from a merchant. I was arrested and my hand was cut off. Incredible, remarked the seaman. How did you get the eye patch? A seagull dropping fell into my eye, replied the pirate. You lost your eye to a seagull dropping? The seaman asked incredulously. Well, said the pirate, now you finish it. Some of you are quicker than others. Which one is it? 3. Here's what we're scared of. You don't have to tell people for them to know. If you tell a story well enough, if you give them the information, they can draw their own conclusion, and basic pedagogy tells you this. Adults only learn what they feel like they have to know. They're not interested in your conclusions. They're interested in their conclusions. Until one day, tension and opportunity. Every story has to have tension or an opportunity. If it's not, you're just doing journalism. And every story has to have an armature, a point, not 15 points, a point. These are 2 movies that get played at my house quite a bit. Everyone know what they are? It's a Wonderful Life, and the other one is? Anyone? Terminator. What if I told you that these movies are the same movie? Someone who believes that their life has amounted to nothing finds out, discovers that their life is incredibly meaningful for others. And because of this, you'll need to do some exposition. This is what your sermon is about. This is where you get to crawl up the backside of Nahum if you want to, and give all of the details, show your homework. But how creatively can you do that? What storytelling metric? And for those of you who were here yesterday morning and heard Dr. Long, what he did was what's in storytelling called a Rashomon. It's a storytelling framework. Those things actually exist. You can learn how to tell stories in certain ways. And then because of this, that's where you enter into a sermon where you're talking, what are the challenges? What are the personal hell that people go through? Where's the bloodletting? All stories of male becoming have a bloodletting. Do you know that most stories of female becoming don't have a bloodletting? Do you know why? Because females already naturally have a bloodletting. It's not a rite of passage for females. Where's the confrontation with personal limitations? What are the stakes in your story? What are the risks? What happens if I do this? What happens if I don't do this? Too many sermons, and I listen to a lot, have no stakes. And this is when people say, he's boring, she's boring. Because what you're talking about doesn't matter to anybody. There are no stakes. Who cares? Most sermons I listen to are designed to do nothing. As Fred Craddock said, there are two kinds of preaching that people won't stand: good preaching and poor preaching. But you should at least try to make it matter. Then at the end of Act 2, there's always a fulcrum. The fulcrum is your hearer going to do this or not? Will they be challenged to do this or not? If you've seen Star Wars, which I think most people probably have, Luke has been in training. The attack on the Death Star. His instrument system goes out, and he hears the voice of Obi-Wan Kenobi saying, "Use the Force, Luke." He's got a choice to make. Your hearers need a choice to make. Is he going to do it or he's not going to do it? And Jesus in the garden, the fulcrum. Am I going to do this or not? Am I going to go through with it or not? Until finally, there's a but God moment. This is when the hero of the story steps in. And then ever since that day, what would life be like if we all did this? What would your life be like if you did this, if you received this, if you thought this way, if you embraced this? So this is the sermon story spine. Every sermon, once upon a time, and every day, until one day. And because of that, and because of that, until finally, and ever since that day. This is a sermon in 3-act structure. Knowing what the acts are, what's the beat. And if it doesn't do anything else, learning to do this helps you at least remember what you're talking about. Like where I am in the story. So, this is how you take a parable and tell it in 3 acts. There's a man who owned a vineyard. He needed to go have some workers. We've got all the characters. He agreed to pay them. Later in the day, he went out and got some more. Later in the day, we got some more. We don't care about those other folks. They don't have any lines. And at the end of the day, he paid them all the same. We have Act 1. We know the setting and the story. And the great thing about Jesus and the parables is that so much of Act 1, setting the world, is already known to the people listening to them. In most of your churches, a lot will already be known. Like everybody knows that Sue is kind of a pain and that Jim talks too much. You don't have to go back through that every time. And then there's a tension. Why do they get the same as all of us who worked all day? Do you begrudge the grace of God? And the answer is always, yes. Everybody does. Until finally, someone realizes they are the recipient of the grace of God, just like everyone else. When you don't have anything to preach, this upcoming Sunday, you can always find a 3-act structure. Thank you.